All right, so we're diving into some really fascinating stuff today, all about habits.
Yeah, looks like we've got quite the collection of sources here.
We do a lot from James Clear, the Atomic Habits guy,
Oh, yeah, of course. Classic.
and some YouTube videos, even a snippet from a Rich Roll podcast.
Wow, covering all the bases.
So let's get right into it. I guess what really struck me going through all this is how much power our habits have.
Yeah, it's incredible how these little everyday things we do can shape, like, our whole lives.
Absolutely. And James Clear, he really gets into the nitty-gritty of that, like not just setting goals, but how those habits actually form.
Right. He starts by defining what a habit actually is. Like, what are we even talking about?
So what is it?
It's basically a behavior that's been repeated enough times that it becomes, well, automatic.
Hmm.
It's like our brain's solution to problems that keep coming up.
Oh, okay, I see. Like brushing our teeth or, I don't know, checking social media every 5 minutes.
Exactly. We don't even have to think about it. Our brain's just on autopilot.
So it's like our brain's trying to save energy by like creating these shortcuts.
Right. And those shortcuts, those habits, can either work for us or against us.
Which brings us to that amazing story about the British cycling team. Remember that one?
Oh, yeah, that's a classic example. They went from being kind of average to like dominating their sport.
By making all these tiny 1% improvements, right?
Yeah. And it's not just that they were making small changes, it's the areas they focused on.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, think about it. They were obsessed with things like washing their hands all the time.
Hand washing. Really?
Yeah. And making sure their team truck was spotless, like crazy clean.
Mm. Okay, but what does that have to do with, like, cycling?
Well, it's all about optimizing everything. They
Gotcha.
figured
Okay.
better hygiene means fewer illnesses,
So
right?
they could train more consistently.
Exactly. And even little things like finding the perfect pillow for better sleep.
It's like they were thinking about every possible advantage, no matter how small.
And the crazy thing is, it worked. They won like 5 out of 6 Tour de France titles.
It's proof that those tiny improvements, when you add them all up, can create massive results.
Totally. And it's not just about the physical stuff, it's the mental impact too.
What do you mean?
Well, by achieving all these small wins, they started to believe in themselves more.
Like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. They started to see themselves as winners, and that belief fueled their performance.
So it wasn't just about like getting stronger or faster. It was about changing their identity.
And that's a key point that James Clear makes the connection between habits and identity.
Okay, so let's talk about that. How do our habits actually shape who we are?
Well, he says every action we take is like a vote for the type of person we want to be.
Oh, I like that. So it's not just about, I don't know, cleaning my room. It's about being a tidy person.
Right. It's a totally different way of thinking about it.
So instead of focusing on achieving a specific outcome, like a clean room, we should focus on building the identity that would naturally lead to that outcome.
Exactly. And that's where those tiny actions become so powerful.
Like every time I choose to go for a run instead of watching TV, I'm reinforcing that identity of being a fit person.
Exactly. You're literally building yourself one habit at a time.
So, okay, this is where I get really interested. How do we actually go about building those good habits?
Well, James Clear has these 4 laws of behavior change, and they're like deceptively simple.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me about these laws.
The first one is make it obvious.
Hmm.
You basically want to design your environment to trigger the behavior you want.
So, like, if I want to read more, I should leave a book on my bedside table instead of my phone.
Precisely. You're making it harder to ignore the good habit.
Makes sense. What's the second law?
Make it attractive. We're naturally drawn to things we enjoy, so how can we make those good habits more appealing?
Well, James Clear talks about the influence of our social circles.
Right. If all your friends are into fitness, you're more likely to get into it too.
So, finding your tribe, people who are already doing the things you want to do.
Exactly. Their energy can be contagious.
Okay, what about law number 3?
Make it easy. This is about reducing the friction between you and the good habit.
So, like meal prepping on Sundays if you want to eat healthy during the week.
Perfect example. You're making it as easy as possible to make the right choices.
And the final law.
Make it satisfying. Reward yourself for those good habits. Make them feel good.
The reward doesn't have to be anything big, right?
Not at all. It could be as simple as, I don't know, enjoying a cup of coffee after a productive work session.
Or that feeling of accomplishment after a tough workout.
Exactly. You're associating those positive feelings with the habit.
Okay, so we've got our 4 laws. Make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. Sounds pretty straightforward. but I have a feeling there's a lot more to unpack here.
Oh, absolutely. We've just scratched the surface.
Well, let's dive deeper, shall we?
There's definitely more to it than just those four laws.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know that even with the best intentions, sometimes, well, life happens.
Totally. Like, what about those days when you just have zero motivation?
Right. Willpower only gets you so far.
That's what James Clear says, too, that relying solely on willpower is a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. It's like a muscle that gets tired. You can't be flexing it all the time.
So instead of just trying harder, we need to, like, set ourselves up for success.
Absolutely. That's where environment design comes in. Remember that first law? Make it obvious.
Yeah, but this time we're making it obvious to avoid the bad habit.
Exactly. Out of sight, out of mind, right?
So, like, if I'm trying to cut back on sugar, I shouldn't have a jar of cookies on the counter.
Exactly. Don't even tempt yourself.
It's like you're removing the cues that trigger those bad habits.
Exactly. And then there's this idea of habit stacking, which I think is super clever.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. It's like piggybacking on an existing habit,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. You're using the momentum of a habit you already have to make a new one stick.
So, like, if I always make coffee first thing in the morning, I could try meditating right after that.
Exactly. You're already in that routine, so it's easier to just add something new to it.
Makes sense. And then there's the 2-minute rule. I mean, it seems almost too simple.
I know, right? But it's all about making it easy to get started. Remember the story about Mitch?
The guy who lost, like, a ton of weight.
Yeah. He started by just going to the gym for 5 minutes a day.
5 minutes, that's it?
Yep. It seems ridiculous, but the point is to just show up.
So you're establishing that routine, the identity of someone who works out.
Exactly. And once you've taken that first step, it's easier to keep going.
It's like that saying, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Exactly. And the 2-minute rule makes that first step super easy.
I love it. Okay, what about tracking? Is that important?
Oh yeah, tracking can be super helpful. It's really motivating to see your progress.
I've used those habit tracker apps, and it is really satisfying to see those streaks building up.
It's like you're gamifying your habits.
Yeah, and it keeps you accountable. Like, if you see that you've been consistent, you're less likely to break the streak.
Exactly. It reinforces that identity of someone who follows through.
So even on those days when I'm feeling lazy, I can look at my tracker and be like, hey, I've been doing this. I'm not going to stop now.
Right. It's a great way to stay motivated. But with all this talk about habits and systems, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture.
Oh, you mean like, why are we doing this in the first place?
Exactly. What's the point of all these habits if they're not leading us towards something we care about?
Which brings us back to the idea of identity-based habits, right?
Yes. We're not just building habits for the sake of it. We're trying to create a certain kind of life.
So the question becomes, who do I want to be? And what habits will help me become that person?
Exactly. Instead of saying, I want to lose weight, ask yourself, what would a healthy person do?
And then start doing those things. It's about aligning your actions with your desired self-image.
Absolutely. It's about finding that sweet spot where discipline and desire intersect.
Okay, now here's something I've been thinking about. We've been talking about the positive side of habits, but are there ever times when even good habits can hold us back?
You know, that's a really interesting question. And it's something James Clear touches on with that whole idea of the peril of comfort zone.
Oh, right. I remember that. Like, you might have a morning routine that's been working great.
But if you never challenge yourself to try something new, you might be missing out on opportunities for growth.
Yeah. So how do you know when a good habit has become more of a rut, you know?
Take some self-reflection. Ask yourself if that habit is still serving you, if it's still aligned with your goals.
And if it's not, what do you do?
Sometimes it's just a matter of tweaking the habit, adapting it as you change. Other times, it might be time to let it go completely.
So it's about being mindful and paying attention to how those habits are actually impacting your life.
Exactly. And being willing to adjust course when needed.
Okay, this is making me think a lot about my own habits. I'm already starting to analyze things.
That's great. It's all about that self-awareness.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot, but what about our natural inclinations? Like, are some people just naturally better at building habits than others?
It's not really about being better, but more about understanding your own strengths and weaknesses.
So, like, if I'm someone who loves being around people, I might find it easier to build habits that involve, I don't know, joining a group fitness class.
Exactly. You're leveraging your natural tendencies to make those habits stick.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. It's about working with yourself, not against yourself.
Precisely. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's about finding what works for you.
This is really making me think. I'm starting to see my own habits in a whole new light.
That's the power of reflection. Take some time to think about your personality, what you enjoy, what you dread.
It's like a whole new level of self-awareness. I'm excited to start applying some of these ideas.
That's awesome. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination.
So true. All right, this has been an amazing exploration of habits so far. We've covered so much.
We have, for the basic definition of a habit to the impact they have on our identity.
But there's one final thing I want to touch on.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we've talked about willpower, environment design, habit stacking, cracking, but what about passion?
Passion.
Hmm,
That's interesting. It's not something James Clear explicitly addressed in these sources.
I know, but it seems important, right? Like, what's the point of building all these habits if they're not leading us towards something we actually care about?
You're right. It's about finding that intersection between our habits and our passions, those things that give our lives meaning.
It's like that quote, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. But I think it applies to habits too.
Totally. When you're passionate about something, those habits become less like chores and more like expressions of who you are.
Exactly. And when you have that intrinsic motivation, those habits are way more likely to stick.
It's not just about discipline. It's about finding that spark that fuels your actions.
I love that. So it's about finding that alignment between our habits and the things that light us up.
Exactly. And when you do, that's when habits have the power to truly transform your life.
I've been thinking about what you said, about finding that spark, that passion. It's kind of inspiring, actually.
It is powerful stuff, right? Like when
Mm.
you're working with that passion, it doesn't even feel like work.
Exactly. But let's be real, it's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows, right?
For sure. Life happens. We all slip up sometimes.
Exactly. And I know we've touched on this, but like, how do we deal with those setbacks?
Well, first off, it's important to remember that setbacks are normal. Like everyone falls off track sometimes.
It's true. I definitely have my moments.
We all do. The key is how we respond to those moments.
And I remember James Clear talking about self-compassion, right? Like
Yeah.
not beating ourselves up when we mess up.
Yeah, it's huge. It's so easy to spiral into that self-criticism.
Totally. But that just makes it harder to get back on track.
Exactly. Instead of being our own worst enemy, we need to be our own best cheerleader.
So instead of saying, ugh, I'm such a failure, we can say, okay, this happened. What can I learn from it?
Exactly. It's about turning those setbacks into learning opportunities.
And I remember that concept of never miss twice. Like
Yeah.
one slip up is okay, but don't let it turn into a pattern.
Yeah, the goal is to get back on track as quickly as possible. Don't let those missteps derail your whole journey.
It's like a course correction, not a complete U-turn.
Right. You adjust and keep moving forward. And remember those 4 laws of behavior change. They can be just as helpful for getting back on track.
Oh, right. Like if I fall off my writing routine, I could use those laws to get back into it.
Exactly. Make it obvious by scheduling time to write. Make it attractive by joining a writing group.
Make it easy by having my writing space all set up.
Yeah.
And make it satisfying by rewarding myself with a nice cup of tea afterward.
You've got it. It's all about using those tools to support yourself.
And I guess this goes back to that whole identity thing too, right? Like even when I mess up, I can remind myself, hey, I'm a writer. This is what I do.
Exactly. It's about holding on to that vision of yourself, even when things get tough.
It's those small actions, day after day, that shape who we become.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about self-compassion, but what about those negative thoughts? The ones that tell you you're not good enough?
Oh man, the inner critic. It can be brutal.
It can, and it can really sabotage our efforts. But James Clear offers some great advice for dealing with that.
Like what?
Well, one thing he suggests is to just acknowledge those thoughts. Don't try to fight them or ignore them.
So you're not suppressing them, you're just like observing them.
Right. Just notice them and say, okay, I hear you, but I'm not going to let you control me.
And another thing he talks about is reframing those negative thoughts into something more positive.
Yes. So instead of saying, I'm terrible at this, you might say, I'm still learning, but I'm getting better every day.
It's about shifting your perspective, focusing on the progress you're making.
Exactly. It's that whole growth mindset idea, believing that you're capable of change and improvement.
And each time you succeed, you reinforce that belief. It's like a positive feedback loop.
Exactly. So pay attention to those thoughts and choose the ones that empower you, the ones that support your growth.
Wow, this whole deep dive has been such an eye-opener. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of habits.
It's amazing, isn't it, how these seemingly small things can have such a huge impact on our lives.
It really is. And the best part is, it's never too late to start building those habits that will help us create the life we want.
Absolutely. No matter where you are in your journey, you can always choose to make a change.
So let's all embrace the process, celebrate the wins, and keep striving to become the best versions of ourselves.
That's what it's all about. Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the world of habits. We hope you've enjoyed it.
And we hope you'll join us next time for another fascinating exploration.